Good afternoon. Welcome to this session, which is another first for GFN, looking at the GFN Fives. I know when the idea of GFN Fives first came up, there was some doubts about what we'd get from it. You know, would we get enough submissions? Would there be enough interest? And I think it's fair to say that everyone involved has been absolutely overwhelmed in terms of both the quality and the numbers of submissions that we've received. And if you haven't had a chance to see all of them, I do recommend them. I think there's a tremendous resource there, and I think it's one of the things that there'll be a lot of use for after this few days. It also strikes me this is probably as close as I'm ever likely to get to having a role in something like the Oscars. But you may be relieved to learn the decisions and the thoughts on the films aren't down to me alone. I'm joined here on the stage by Dave Cross, but we've also got an international audience to help guide you through some of the highlights of the GFN Fives. So we've got Aisha Alaran, who's in Nigeria, Eliana Rabushkin in New Zealand, and Will Godfrey, who I think is still in the United States unless he's escaped. But there's going to be opportunities for the panel all to contribute about some of the high points, some of the very powerful films, any themes that emerge from the Fives. There'll also be the opportunity for you and our online audience to raise points and questions. But I think, you know, before I start, I'd really like to take the opportunity to thank everyone who submitted one of the Fives. There's some tremendous work in there. But without me rambling on further, Eliana, you're closest to me as I look at the screen, although most distant in reality. What was your favourite Five? What one do you think really stood out for you?
I think that's not a very fair question, but because I mean, I was very surprised on the quality of the productions, and as you said, I mean, there was one video that. It was a whole, you know, cinematographic experience. It's the video from Thailand. It was, you know, it was very emotional. You know, I almost like felt it. You know, I was like, it's powerful. You know, the messaging, like this video that was made. I don't remember in particular who developed this video, but it's like showing like the actual situation that a lot of Thai people are experiencing. That they are not allowed to choose, and they're being criminalized and actually actively criminalized and punished for actually having a decision that is improving their health. And I just find that video striking, but I also find the two videos from Colombia, and not because I'm from Colombia, no personal preference, no nationalisms here, but the two videos from Colombia were fantastic. One video was even mentioning aspects of harm reduction with actual cigarettes, which is something that I was not thinking about before.
Thank you. Dave, what was your favourite?
My favourite, and it was my favourite, was the one that was produced by Ethra. And I never ceased to be amazed. Coming from a long time ago now, an educational background, I'm very used to sitting in a meeting of peers and lots of people having ideas and it being impossible to go anywhere or come to a decision. And so Ethra just impressed me every single time, and through the video, the multiplicity of voices, the voiceovers coming in, everybody combining together, and time again since its inception, Ethra has brought together all of these diverse interests across 16 countries to speak with a unified voice and to tackle the biggest issues that are currently facing vaping and tobacco harm reduction in Europe. The SHEAR report, the EU tax directive, the TPD review, the EU beating cancer plan, and the up-and-coming COP9. And that's what comes through for me. The most impressive thing about their video is these people, these individuals, unfunded, working together and producing top quality submissions going into the things that impact us as vapers day to day.
That was a really strong argument for an Academy Award, I think. That's, well, Aisha, I know you produced one of the Fives as well, and don't be shy if you want to say you think that was the best one. I certainly think if there was a category of one that was very pragmatic approaches that people should consider and could adopt, you'd be in with a definite chance of winning one of the awards. But what was your favourite or favourites?
Okay, yeah, favorites is actually better way to describe it. Actually, I watched quite a lot of the videos, and all of them really got a message, and it was really beautiful to see the wide range of submission and expertise in the videos. Well, I think maybe because I'm from Nigeria, which is a lower and middle income country, so I think the one that really stood out for me was for a smoke-free Pakistan, the video submitted by Dawood Malik. The animation was so beautiful, and the information the information was so was passed in this really interesting and beautiful and compelling way. So, and besides that, I think the THR advocacy submitted from Malawi, I think that also, because it actually addressed how we can approach tobacco harm reduction advocacy in the developing world, and I think that could be applied to a lot of countries. So I think I really like that also. So those were the two.
Thank you. I think there was quite a lot of the Fives did a very good job of addressing some of the issues faced by lower and middle income countries, and I think you're right. I think your own one, which you didn't promote there, but that and the contribution from Malawi were both very practical things that need to be done. Will, turning to you, which ones did you enjoy most?
Quite a number, actually, but I want to join Eliana in commending While in Thailand by Asa Saligupta. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that one, for absolutely astonishing production values. I wasn't sure to begin with if I was watching a car commercial or a Hollywood movie, but it was really something, and I do recommend checking that out. But packs a punch in the substance as well. We are harassed physically, financially, and brutally, really exposed to propaganda and repression of Thailand's vape prohibition. Of course, significantly influenced by events in the United States, and a couple of other videos that I really appreciated that dealt with some of the issues around THR advocacy in the US and elsewhere was Tobacco Harm Reduction Climate USA by John de Miranda, and Why is the Debate About Tobacco Harm Reduction So Nasty? Alex Wodak. I think that's one that a lot of us here could appreciate. And another one I'll mention at this point is Why Bans of Low-Risk Nicotine Alternatives to Smoking in LMICs Do More Harm Than Good. Title, a real mouthful, by Inko and Jeffrey Zamora. Content right on the money. I really recommend that one.
Excellent, thank you. So there's been a few sort of themes touched upon there, but are there any sort of commonalities that you sort of came through, or areas that particularly struck you in sort of the themes they were addressing? And then I'll pick on Dave because I saw he looked away then, so I'll take it.
Commonalities not so much beyond the fact that they all impinged on consumers. The Juul one, very pertinent because we're currently undergoing this post-Brexit restructuring of legislation, and it just highlighted two things to me. One, I didn't know silica wicks were still being used. I didn't know they were a thing. But also the success of using high-strength nicotine products, which is something a number of us have been calling out for a number of years. And hopefully that gets addressed. And also the fact that as consumers, we're not experts, we're not, some of us are scientists, but we're not technical experts in this area. We rely on experts to give us information, to give us the truth and advice. And so it was striking, I'm just referring down to my notes, I'm sorry, that the Centre of Health and Research and Education highlighted that deficit in knowledge in one key fundamental area, and that's the GPs. And if you've got over half of the medical profession that was surveyed coming back and telling you that nicotine causes cancer, there's a huge disconnect going on there. And as consumers, we have to be worried. And that highlights that. So I think for me, then it ends up with the state of vaping in New York. And this is where it finishes, when we stop being given information, when we rely on alternative facts, which are so popular nowadays. And Spike, I adored her entire video, because it's just this ride of catastrophe that bottoms out in this beautiful, pithy little statement that she makes to camera, where she points out the fact that on one hand, America are combating underage use of cannabis by legalizing cannabis, and then on the other, New York is prohibiting the use of vape products in order to protect under 21s, and the disconnect that goes on there, and the importance that we should have as consumers of access to the evidence and the truth.
I think that video stuck with me, because I think Spike's ability to carry on in the face of repeated adversity is incredible, actually. And I also think, that there is a couple of, there's a strong theme running through around education, both generally and professionals. And I wonder if I might look to Eliana and then Aisha about that issue around educating professionals and the importance of helping even professionals understand the science, because that's a real problem that I see. So Eliana, if I could ask you first.
Yeah, so I think it comes with frustration to see that there is such, and like all the evidence we have and we've been collecting, and how this evidence that appears to be consistent enough, and after all this growing evidence that is even more difficult to debate or to argue against, we still have this resistance from, in particular, people that have a particular way of wiring, of understanding this problem, and thinking that the same problem can be handled the same way, and you have to expect, a different outcome, because we've been having this conversation for more than 30, 40 years in many occasions. We are dealing right now with a pandemic, and we had 30, 40 years ago, we have another pandemic, and in which harm reduction was centered as an element to deal with that pandemic. We have a different population at risk, and maybe that's why we didn't care too much about learning the lesson right. It was the LGBTIQ population, and it was like, okay, we don't care about them, it's a pandemic, it's affecting them, not us. Right now, we're all being affected. Still, the harm reduction paradigm is a paradigm that many professionals, health professionals, don't want to learn about. A paradigm. It's a fundamental paradigm in line with human rights, and I think that this connection that we have in understanding the importance of self-determination, dignity, and respect for fundamental human rights. rights needs to be educated, like doctors need to learn about this more, understand that the patient is central in their decision-making process, and that because the patient has the right to decide what option works better for them, they also need to educate themselves and find out what's the best way to help them to have the best attainable standard of health, which is a fundamental human right.
Thank you. Arshad, you've got anything to add to that? I mean, some of your work was with professionals.
Yeah, actually, I one or two things to add to that. And I agree with Eliana. And okay, there's this, I think healthcare professionals could actually play a huge role in increasing access of smokers to tobacco harm reduction products, especially vaping. But there's this distrust, there's this overestimation of the harm nicotine causes, there's this overestimation of the harm of electronic cigarettes, and in the LMICs especially, there's this ignorance, there's just this not knowing what electronic cigarettes is for many healthcare professionals, and that's kind of a huge problem. That's kind of a little scary if you think about it, because at this moment, tobacco harm reduction should actually be everywhere, should be embraced everywhere, because it could actually help a lot of smokers. But that's not the case, and I think that's a huge issue. So we still have a long way to go to make sure that healthcare professionals actually know more about vaping and actually keep an open mind, because I think that's one of the issues. Because it is science. In science, you are not supposed to keep a closed mind. They are actually supposed to keep an open mind and evidence-based work, like in tobacco harm reduction, because there are a lot of evidences that have been saying that tobacco harm reduction is safe and it's a viable alternative for smokers to outrightly quit, for people that are unable to or either unwilling to quit. So tobacco harm reduction could actually do a lot for them, but I don't think most healthcare professionals, most doctors, pharmacists, nurses are seeing it that way, and I think that's a huge problem that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, thank you. And before I sort of take the chair's liberty to promote one of the videos that I thought was particularly interesting, if anyone here wants to comment on a video or ask a question, the microphone's there, and you'll probably catch my eye as you walk towards it. I think one of the videos that really caught me, because it's delivered in such a calm way, but it begs a lot of questions, is the one done produced by Dr. John Oyston, who's an anaesthesiologist. And you know, it really does, why are doctors in the UK so sceptical? And yet, you know, we do have the advantage here of Public Health England being quite supportive. We've got a supportive environment, and yet medics are very, very wary to endorse it. We sort of often accept, you know, it's grudgingly. We don't sort of see a lot of promotion for this kind of thing. You know, the grudging, well, sometimes acceptance really doesn't help deliver the potential. Looking ahead, I think you know, there's a great resource here amongst the 70+ GFN Fives, and I'll start with you again, Dave, if I may. Which one or ones would you be most keen to share with people who may be somewhat doubtful about the value of tobacco harm reduction? Which one do you think might help sell the story to people?
Well, it depends on which language they speak. And if their recall of Spanish is slightly better than mine was, there was an excellent overview in Spanish. For me, sorry, I'm going to go off on a tangent. There's one of the things that I find personally frustrating is you have leading public health bodies presenting information that at best can be described as disingenuous, and yet you have tobacco companies producing informative videos that are factually based, that are measured in what they're saying and put over facts for consumers to base an opinion on. There's a volte-face. Everything's turned upside down. And so not only was that video very accessible, the nicotine alternatives and preparations for nicotine administration, I'd never heard of Ambil before, but also I've lost it and I'm back again, one produced by BAT that looked at the decades of legislation and ultimately made a plea for evidence-based, proportional, sensible legislation. It doesn't, the ones I've watched don't apply directly to consumers, certainly not from an approach of convincing them that tobacco harm reduction products are right for them or informative. I haven't seen those videos. But I think they're very important, the ones I've seen, for education and for broadening and understanding. So the one I referred to initially, the dual one, that used their evidence looking at 3 different strengths of liquids, and the higher strength liquid performed best. It's always concerned me when I've been talking to people from industry that they see it as an imperative to help people on their journey get from high strength to no strength liquids. And to my mind, that's counterintuitive, because as you go down with the strength of liquid you use, you tend to either increase the voltage or increase the amount you're vaping. And then I just hark back to research by Dr. Farsalinos, what was it, 6-7 years ago, where he advised against using high-powered setups. At the time, he was suggesting we use higher strength liquids and take fewer puffs.
Will, which of the films do you think would help push the advocacy of tobacco harm reduction?
In terms of speaking to somebody who's unfamiliar,
converting those who are sceptical but convertible.
I mean, I have to go back to the Inco Jeffrey Zamora video, which I think does really well for focusing on some of the fundamentals, starting off with smokers who are losing their lives to smoking-related diseases, 8 million a year, 80% of them in LMICs. And these, of course, are the places where smokers have the least access to the tobacco harm reduction interventions that can save lives, influenced, of course, by the union and other Bloomberg vehicles, which have resulted in the kind of prohibitions that we see in Thailand, Cambodia, and elsewhere, India. And so I really liked how that video spelled out the consequences of philanthropic colonialism, is the term it used. I liked how it focused on deaths and lives that can be saved, the fundamentals of THR. I liked how it focused on LMICs, which is bearing most of the consequences of opposition to THR. And I liked how it focused above all on consumers, ending with that well-known phrase, nothing about us without us. So I would recommend that as a primer to share with anybody who is venturing into THR for the first time.
Thank you. Before I go across to Aisha, I know there's one question from the audience. Jerry?
Yeah, Jerry Stimson, one of the founders of GFN. This is the first time we've done the GFN Fives, and we had no idea whether it would work or not, but it clearly has worked. It's been a great success, and it's a joy to watch the submissions we've had. We accepted nearly everything. We didn't really have many guidelines, but one of the guidelines was we take anything as long as it's about 5 minutes and within the spirit of the conference, and being in the spirit of the conference leads you a lot of discretion. But in fact, nearly everything was good. So I got two. We'll do it again because this is going to be, I think, an integral part of GFN meetings. But I got two questions for the panel. We had very few guidelines. And should we have more guidelines for how people should do these and produce them? And the second question is, what hints and tips would you have to potential producers of GFN Fives?
Who'd like to start on that one? Who? Aisha? Oh, Eliana, go on.
Yeah, that's fine. I think if we put guidelines, maybe we'll restrict the creativity, which was amazing because it was very creative. I was very surprised. The animations, very high level, very high level of work that you wouldn't expect to see, because we are very used to seeing conferences, these posters, and, like a little bit of lack of, these kind of movements and dynamics and the way you communicate a message that really goes really deeply, into your fibers. So I think that would be maybe something that we still let people to be as creative as they can be, because I think creativity really communicates and resonates well with people. Potentially what I would like is to have a more categories, so it is easy for someone that understands the topic or wants to understand a particular topic to navigate deeper in that topic, because there were kind of 3 categories that a lot of them have particular intersections that appear maybe to be belonging to another category. And so as for instance, a person that is interested in the science of harm reduction and start navigating aspects on human rights and advocacy, that would be a little bit confusing, because that would be like, so it's as a matter of helping someone with a particular interest to navigate a little bit multiple videos, because we're speaking about around 6 to 10 hours of videos. So I think that would be my only recommendation. I don't know if someone has another comment to make.
Thank you. Aisha, any tips, seeing as you were one of the, as you produced one of the Fives?
Yeah, okay. I think what I would like to add is, I agree with Eliana. We could actually have more categories. I think having more categories would allow easier navigation, sort of, so to be easier to navigate the different categories. They kind of sort of overlap at the moment. So, and there are a lot of videos. So if we have more categories, that will be easier to deal with. And I also think there shouldn't be restrictions. People can actually submit videos just based on, in the spirit of the GFN conference, and if it's in line with tobacco harm reduction and promoting tobacco harm reduction or advancing it any way it is. So I think that's it.
Thank you. Will?
Yeah, I completely agree with the points just made. Having watched a lot of these videos, and I think that their diversity and the range of ways in which people approached this communication challenge is one of the great strengths of the Fives as a whole. So I wouldn't suggest imposing more restrictive guidelines. Perhaps one tip for people making them is, it sort of reminds me a little bit of what my English teacher told me about essay writing many years ago, but is to sort of not overestimate the amount of information that you can impart with 3 or 4 minutes of speaking, and probably go with something like say what you're about to say, then say it, and then say what you've just said. Possibly, more impactful communication can be achieved that way, rather than diving too much into the weeds in such a limited amount of time.
Yeah, good advice. Anything to add?
Categories, fantastic idea. Certainly a number of Twitter users, you pull up a question and give them a category, and they will instantly, some of them seem to have a library at home where they can instantly resource that information. It, I think, would help to have the categories for people looking to make videos next year, to see something similar to what they wish to do, to see what's gone before. And the only thing I would say, I'd urge more consumers to get involved and to offer up something that they feel passionate about. I'd like to see some of the consumer passion reflected in the Fives.
Yeah, all good points. So some advice for us to take away there, and certainly from my point of view, I like the fact that there was such a range of them, from basic PowerPoints through to things that genuinely could grace Hollywood. I've got one online question here about the impact. Does the panel think basically that these sorts of things can have an impact with people who are opposed to tobacco harm reduction. And I know we kind of touched on that. But I like to think so, and I think it helps to have a much broader range of people and organisations. And I think particularly on your point, if we could get more consumers to add their voice, I think that does generate a sort of power. I don't know if the panel agree with that.
I'm not sure. Slightly negative, but I kind of feel what was said earlier, was it Clive, who suggested that the only time he's witnessed change was when there was an emotional involvement between the person, a development of empathy. And I'm not sure you get through to Stanton Glantz by showing him a video. I'm not sure Martin McKee is going to change his mind. Just because there's 5 minutes of somebody saying how much it changed their life. Maybe it's defeatist. I don't see it.
Maybe it's not so much for those who are quite that hostile, but those who are somewhat doubtful.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions from the audience? I do know that there was one question I got on here that people were asking how to see the GFN Fives. So just for those, it's on the website. So I guess one of the sessions that or one of the themes this year that we've touched upon, which had quite a lot of entries, was on the science theme. So I'm aware we have 3 people with some level of scientific backgrounds, 2 quite high. What do you think were the most valuable scientific contributions? Which ones stood out for you? Because as someone with a CSE level 2 in biology, as the high point of my science academic career, some of it was fascinating, but some of it was a little beyond me. Although I will say that one of the graphics from one of the science presentations was one of the things that has stuck with me most. But I will start with Eliana again, if I may. What did you think were the best of the science sort of categories?
Well, I mean, I had the opportunity to navigate some of them. I was actually very interested in the determination of 3-hydroxybenzoapyren, which is one of the biomarkers that they actually validated the methodology, and it's a very good element. It's a good biomarker that can help you to understand the harm that is caused by the substance that is released from the combustion of tobacco. And it can help somehow to differentiate them from other ways of safer nicotine products. And I just find that interesting because it's a fairly simple technology, fairly simple technology that can be used, in any type of settings, because it's the same LMIC like chromatography, and it's a good way of understanding the harm and prospective harm and immediate harm. I mean, other than having the carbon monoxide analyzers that we usually use and for smoking cessation, which at the end of the day is not necessarily a very good picture of harm. I also like the video that Ricardo Polosa did on the COPD, which was as an outcome of a very interesting piece of work that actually was quite comprehensive. It was a 5-year follow-up on different people with COPD, and how obviously we know this is common science and common sense, but it's just to have more data for us to support our claims, how the life expectancy or the quality of life increase, and how in general, all these parameters that are used for analyzing the lung function and the impact that these products, the safer nicotine products, including heated tobacco and e-cigarettes, have done. And it was a very substantial improvement. And I speak that as a pharmacist and as someone that has a mother that smoked for 52 years and has had severe COPD, and I actually witnessed by myself how the COPD of my mom improved after she started vaping. So I think those are some videos I want to talk about on my sense. I don't know if somebody has some other views on other videos that they saw.
Thank you. Aisha, over to you.
Okay, I think for the science, I think the video on nicotine and inflammation, and also the one on nicotine addiction, and also the one Professor Ricardo Pelosa did, I think those are the ones that really stood out to me in the science. Because, okay, the one on nicotine and inflammation actually explored the mechanism of action of nicotine as a stimulant, and actually not a terrible drug, or not as overestimated, as risk is overestimated, the harmful effect of nicotine as it is overestimated in the media and by healthcare professionals. So it just broke it down as nicotine is a stimulant, is a sympathomimetic even, and explained that although it has both anti-inflammatory and pro-inflammatory actions, it could actually benefit a lot of people. It is used to treat inflammatory diseases in clinical trials, such as I think in Crohn's disease and in ulcerative colitis. And although it has a role in atherosclerosis as an inflammatory agent, but it is not the major factor in atherosclerosis. So I think that kind of breaks that down and explain that nicotine is not this harmful drug as it is being perceived. And I think also the video on nicotine addiction is also one that actually stood out for me, and I think it explored how lifelong use of nicotine couldn't be compared to smoking cigarette, and very low risk of nicotine use over a long-term use. It has a very low risk over long-term use. And I think I agree, Eliana, on the video from Professor Pelosa also on the effect of e-cigarettes on COPD patients. I think it is actually particularly interesting because it is actually a 5-year-long study, and at the end of the day, they discovered that when smokers switch to e-cigarettes, smokers that have COPD, when they switch to e-cigarette, they could actually have an improvement in their quality of life. Their clinical outcome increases just because they switch from e-cigarette, from smoking cigarette to e-cigarette. So I think that's actually something really interesting, and I think it further shows that evidence-based research and science is a way to go in the argument for tobacco harm reduction.
Thank you. Dave, do you want to? I don't want to pull up. I want to extend gratitude to the professionals who. Richard Feynman said that if you can't explain something simple in simple terms, you haven't understood it. And as a bear of little brain, I appreciate the experts who have produced the videos and presented their findings in terms that a layman like me can understand. And I really appreciate that. Will, did you want to say anything on the science aspect of it?
Fortunately, I completely agree with the scientific analyses of my co-panelists, so I don't need to add anything of my own there.
I think it's very wise. But there is one question which I think is pretty much into your world, Dave, here, is about the potential for GFN Fives as a vehicle to help empower consumers, which I guess is not less of a question and more of a statement which aligns with what you were just saying. But I also think from what we just heard, there is, I think here, some targeted potential educational material that we can share with medics, scientists, and others. And I think that's one of the great strengths of the Fives, is that there's a great range of things there which I think are quite compelling. We're getting towards the end of the session. Are there any questions in the room? No, okay. Well, I will keep checking. I think we haven't got many here online.
I would echo the whole utilisation of the videos by consumers, that if they see one that they think is appropriate, we've been saying for a number of years, keep in contact with your MPs. Despite the fact here in the UK, despite the fact we've moved away from Europe, what happens in Europe will impact on what we do here to some level. So send copies of these videos to your local politician. Use it when you go to your doctor if he's or she's slightly averse to the use of e-cigs. I think there's a huge potential for these videos in doing that thing that you asked me earlier about convincing people who, let's say, are sceptical rather than averse to THR.
Well, I mean, that's the point I was just trying to make. Actually, I can think of some of the fives, and there's two from John de Miranda, and one particularly about smoking as a harm reduction toolkit. I come from a sort of drugs policy background. I know people who are a little bit doubtful. Wouldn't have any problem convincing them of the merits of substitute prescribing in other areas, but we're not really sure. But I think his presentation, it's 5 minutes. You can say to someone, I'd like you to spend five minutes looking at this. It's not too much out of your life, and I hope and I think there's a few of these could have a significant impact. As we come to the end of this, is any last points any of the panel drawn from across the globe would like to make?
Yeah, I want to make very important mentions to some videos that I couldn't mention, but for instance, Aaron Beavert and You Don't Know Nicotine was four of the fives. So obviously, we have to be very fair that his whole movie is a masterpiece of activism. So I mean, it's not very fair to even compare, like all this movie with fives and lots of fives, because four of the fives were from him. So I just want to give that sort of notion of balance, And we're actually speaking with an Oscar director, I'm sure, someone with lots of experience in making a wonderful, wonderful movie that I hope people can watch, because it's life-changing. It really, even myself, someone that is in this world of THR, it changed my mind in many ways of how I understand nicotine. Okay, so that's one statement I wanted to make on Aaron Beavers and wonderful four of those fives. I also wanted to make notions on the importance of intersectionality. So Mariwa Glover made this video on the 5%, which is when a country is considered smoke-free, and what are the voices of those? What are the voices of those that are not going to quit, or that at the point in which a government says, we are smoke-free, we don't care about you? And those 5% are the ones that are actually more challenged with the structural systems that lead them to actually use the substance and to be more hesitant to THR. And how most of them are particularly minorities, LGBTI populations, indigenous groups, which is another of the videos that Mariwa did, which is a fantastic piece of work in which Mariwa tried their very best with all these limitations to analyze the trends on tobacco consumption in multiple indigenous groups around the world. So that's all the finalized comments I wanted to make. Fantastic videos made also from my land here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And yeah, that's my final comment, my closing comment.
Thanks very much. We are running out of time, but Aisha, Will, any last comments?
Yeah, I think I was able to say anything about the video from South Korea on end-time smoking cessation. I think it's actually a very beautiful research that was done on the impact of electronic nicotine delivery system on smoking cessation in South Korea. And despite the government distrust and ban on e-cigarettes and other safer nicotine products, they could actually prove that smoking e-cigarette could actually help smokers to quit smoking. And I think that, and then the human rights video, although it was short, it actually provided a very important message on the importance of inclusivity and including everybody. And I think that's all. Thank you.
No, thank you. Will?
Yeah, just to quickly, I think it's important to include a note of optimism. Necessarily in this space, a lot of our discussions and a lot of the videos revolve around suffering, death, and disastrous policy decisions that exacerbate both. But there are real-world positive impacts of our advocacy, and John Miranda was one who asked, is there a sea change in the Biden's administration's attitude to harm reduction? We did see recently that the Office of National Drug Control Policy, for the very first time, included harm reduction as a strategy. The FDA, of course, has approved lower or modified risk applications for products like snus and IQOS, the heat-not-burn product. We'll see what it pronounces on vaping products soon. So I think it's important to focus on what's wrong, yes, but also what we can achieve. And I would recommend that video as one way of doing so.
Thanks, Will. That's an excellent point. And to add to, a great way to end a session on a point of optimism, I think I'll repeat the point about engagement. And on that, I think Alex Wodak's Five is also well worth watching. We're pretty much out of time now, so I would just like to ask you to join me in thanking not just our wonderful panel, but also all those who contributed to the Fives. They're brilliant. It's an outstanding resource. Thank you.